work as a software engineer for Google. When you work on software, you have some specific goals in mind, and the user is using your software in some specific manner. However, from time to time, you come across the stories that are amazing and inspiring. And I would like to share a few of these stories with you. The first one begins about 1 million years ago, or more so, when a meteor crashed in the center, in the red center. There was nobody there to witness it, and all that was left was a deep scar in the heart of Palm Valley. About 50,000 years ago, the first people started populating this continent. We don't know the exact dates, but we know that around 40,000 years ago, they made it to Lake Mungo. 20,000 years later, the first settlement started appearing around what we now call Alice Springs in the red center. One of the stories that these people were telling, the Arunda people were telling, was about the star that fell to earth, making a noise like a thunder. It fell into a waterhole called Puka. We don't know exactly how the story began or what the origins were, but we might suspect a few reasons. Nearby Alice Springs, there are Henbury craters that are about 4,200 years old. They are a result of the meteorite impact, and because of their age, they are most likely to be witnessed by local people. The other source of the story might be the Norala story about the cosmic baby that fell to Earth. It might be a pure coincidence. It doesn't really matter that much, but what matters is that the story has been told and retold over generations and has been recorded for the first time in 1945 by Geza Ronhan. It has been re-recorded by Diane Austin Bruce in 1994. In 2003, two Danish engineers, Jens and Lars Rasmussen, lost their jobs in Silicon Valley, and they decided to start working on maps that would be available to anybody with access to the internet. The company worked gained two more engineers, Noel Gordon and Stephen Ma, and was acquired by Google, and in 2005 it became Google Maps. In 2009, Dwayne Hamaker, an astronomer at Macquarie University, decided to investigate the connection between the Puka waterhole story and real-time events. As inspecting the red center physically is not a possibility, he turned to Google Maps, and he used our satellite imagery to scan vast amounts of red center. If you can see under the letter N, there is a circular depression. This is what Dwayne found. He consulted the lecturer at Macquarie University, Craig O'Neill, and they decided this might be a meteor impact site. They packed the car, and together with two other students did what no sane person would dream about. They drove in one shot from Sydney to Palm Valley. They survived the trip and managed to conduct the geological study of the area. They found that indeed the depression could not be attributed to natural erosion. The collected rock samples revealed shock quartz, which further confirmed that this is probably a meteorite impact site. This is one of these discoveries that links a 1-million-year-old event, the Dreamtime stories, and use of Google Maps that led to a real discovery. This is Dwayne Hamaker doing the investigation. When Google Maps came online, the only thing it was showing was the North America. Soon thereafter, England and Ireland were added, and it was decided to place them in geographically correct location. This created somewhat strange maps, and the headlines at the time were proclaiming that Google Maps is showing the world according to views or knowledge of George W. Bush. Soon thereafter, we managed to put more continents on the planet on a map, and it actually started looking like a decent map. However, in many places, the data was very inaccurate. At the same time, the wikis were exploding in popularity. The red blip is when I was actually hired by Google. It didn't make that much of a blip on news. Wikis people were amazed by Wikipedia, and the thinking was at the time that that we could use the same technology to help us improve the maps for everybody. Rather than complaining to us in angry emails, people could correct data or add the data that we didn't have. However, maps themselves in 2006 were a very immature technology. It was written somewhat in haste, and just supporting the main use cases of maps was putting enough strain on engineers. As a result, the effort was scaled down. It was moved from Sydney to Bangalore, and later, in 2006, Lars traveled to Bangalore and asked the engineers to actually stop. And to their credit, they did not. This is the autonomy that we've heard about. What came out of this effort is something called the map maker. Essentially, the concept is very simple. In certain areas, the information that we have from data providers is either inaccurate or doesn't exist at all. However, we have a very good satellite imagery. It is actually easy to obtain a centimeter level resolution from satellites. Due to government restrictions, this mostly is limited to about 50 centimeters. However, in cities, you can sometimes obtain a 6 centimeter resolution. At this resolution, it's easy to distinguish streets, buildings, and major geographical features. And this is what MapMaker does. It presents the satellite imagery to users, and they can draw on top of it. And the results are outstanding. In 160 countries, Google Maps are created by users who actually live in an area and paint the area with actual features. Let me see if I can quickly show you a video. This is what map of Karachi in Pakistan looks like. It starts with nothing. Then the major streets appear. Quickly the airport is put in place. More small streets are added. People add parks. And finally somebody notices that the major river is missing and the river is If you actually go to Google Maps, this is the exact picture you will see. When you're a Google MapMaker user, you will see the changes that other users are adding almost instantaneously. However, it takes independent verification before they appear on Google Maps. The other thing that you can do with Google Maps is create, using the similar technology, create your custom maps. Something called My Maps. When first was released, I created the map of Hello World of programming languages, just putting the languages in the area where they were roughly invented. This is, you can see that Pascal has been invented in Switzerland. Once I created those maps, I created a few more maps for my parents, but didn't pay that much attention to it afterwards. Fortunately, some other people did. The three people, Dr. Matthew Zook from the University of Kentucky, Mark Graham from the University of Oxford, and Tyler Shelton from the University of Kentucky, created a site called floatingship.org. The site has been summarized by them as cyberspace places users much fun. Essentially, they collect the information that is available in public maps, analyze it, and plot it back on maps, and gives them a unique insight into what particular region is, or what people think the particular region is. The first map I will show you is a map of major religions. The way they do this map is they look for public maps and collected the terms related to Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And the given dot is plotted in the color that given terms dominate. So if you see a blue dot, that means the Christianity-related terms were dominating. Yellow, that means Buddhism-related terms were dominating. Green, Islam, and red, Hinduism. This pretty much reflects our knowledge of the world. But they did a twist. They added the fifth term to it. The term was sex. And here's how the world looks. All of a sudden it becomes much more purple. Now you know who cares more about religion, who cares more about sex. The next map shows you the distribution of three terms: pizza, guns, and strip clubs. The yellow dots represent areas where strip clubs were the most dominant. And you can clearly see where Las Vegas is located in the United States. Some keen observers actually noticed that the other yellow dots are close to military bases. And you can see that pizza is much more popular than guns. The next map is about the distribution of bars. Somebody actually created a map that mentioned bars 1,139 times around Chicago, Illinois. This map is not that surprising. It actually reflects well the population density in the United States. However, the surprise came when the authors compared the frequency of references to bars and references to grocery stores. The yellow dots means that grocery stores were dominant. The red, the bars. They always thought that yellow dots will be dominant because food is a necessity, while bar is not. However, it turns out that it's not always the case. In the areas around Great Lakes, the actual terms for bars dominate. That's what they call the beer belly of America. And the last map I'm going to show you, there are many more maps on their side, but the last map shows you the geography of vices. So you see the alcohol, caffeine, and tobacco. Again, the yellow dots represent more mentions of alcohol. Blue dots, which you actually cannot see here, there are few on the map, represent more reference to caffeine, and tobacco dominates. Wherever tobacco dominates, you see green dots. You can see that Europe, especially Germany, is particularly heavy on tobacco. I'm going to change the topic slightly. These were already the successes we had with various technologies. What I'm working on now is something called Google Wave. And it turns out that most people have one reaction to it. What is Google Wave? A company called LiquidNet put a site easier to understand than Google Wave, where people can vote whether Google Wave or some particular theory or notion is easier to understand. It turns out that we don't do that well. So we're harder to understand than that, by a large margin. The Swedish chef, osmotic pressure, it's getting more challenging. Combinatorial game theory, and vector calculus. Here are a few things that we are easier to understand. Molotov and Ribbentrop Pact. I guess most people didn't hear about it. The end of Donnie Darko. Chinese telegraph code. We beat the United States code by a large margin. And so what is Google Wave? Think of a conversation that you have with your friends or whoever. The conversation does not really reside with any of you. It is something that is dynamically created between you. If somebody joins the conversation becomes richer, but it doesn't change where the conversation exists. If people leave, then the conversation becomes poorer. If everybody leaves, the conversation disappears. And this is what Google Wave is trying to be, essentially a conversation. If you think of how you conduct conversation online, it's most of the time it was done via email. However, email creates essentially a copy of what you said and distributes to everybody. When you reply to email, you reply to a copy that is in particular your inbox, but you don't really know what other people are writing at the same time. If you are late to the conversation, you have to recreate it from top-posted, deeply nested emails, which is often a frustrating experience. And finally, if you forget, CC somebody, then it creates even more mess. Dr. Martin Cooper, the creator of a mobile phone, pointed out that what fundamentally changed with the mobile phone is that by taking it out of the place and putting it in everybody's pocket, you change how that you don't call a place, but you call a person. That changes fundamentally how you use the phones. What Google Wave is trying to do is kind of an inverse thing to mobile phones. It tries to take the copy out of everybody's inbox and place it in a central location. It also adds a real-time element to it, which means that you see what other people are typing, and because this is a web page, you have all sorts of new types of interaction possible, where you can embed images, maps, or collect data and assemble them and show them to everybody. And if you are a latecomer to a conversation, because it's all recorded conversation, that you can use a playback to see how the conversation got to that point. But whenever you join it, you see the latest state of it, whatever has been decided up to this point, and seeing multiple copies of, oh no, only look, pay attention to things highlighted in pink right now. We don't have as many success stories with Google Wave. It is still a very immature product, but we are working on it hard. We didn't compose an internet symphony like YouTube did, but we already had some class composing, for example, Latin poetry in a collaborative fashion in Latin. We had a debate-wise youth panel use Google Wave successfully to coordinate events during the Copenhagen climate talks. We hope that more is coming. When I was preparing this talk, I thought, how does it all fit together? And one of the talks that you can watch on TED is presented by Daniel Dennett, who makes a very convincing argument that the same laws that apply to biological species, the natural selection laws, apply to information. When you have a particular biological individual, their fitness can be assessed in many levels. How well it withstands the pressure of the environment, how good it is attracting mates, how many offspring it has, how well it cares for them. The same thing can be said about information. And information or theory has to be able to withstand the scrutiny of facts. If it's a beautiful theory that is easy to understand, it will become more widespread. It has to well preserve its content so it does not degrade over time. If biological species are put in a highly isolated environment, in a niche, they often adapt and become a brand new species. However, once the geographical barriers are broken, the flood of other species can overwhelm them. Or even if the niche is not rich enough, they might not survive. And in a similar fashion, the information, if it is a theory, is developed by isolated community, it might become a very unusual theory that we've never heard before. But it might lack the power to thrive, or when the geographical or other barriers are overcome, it might be overcome by theories and ideas from the outside. And in that case, when you think of tools like maps, search, books, etc., essentially what they do is both increase the fitness of ideas, but also subject them to greater environmental pressures. With maps, now you can inspect vast areas of a red center without leaving the comfort of your lab. But also it means that you cannot no longer claim that it's turtles all the way down. With search, you can look for the best bits of information, and books greatly preserve the value of information. With Google Wave, what we have hoped to achieve is essentially enable much better, much more efficient collaboration of communities and change how people communicate. And the few strange examples that I was talking about, the beer belly of America or the discovery of a million-year-old meteorite impact site, essentially you can think of it as these brand new species whose information DNA has been created from genes, sometimes the best, sometimes the weirdest, collected from all over the internet. Thank you very much. Thank you.